10-minute murder.
Betsy Aardsma was born on July 11, 1947, in Holland, Michigan. She was born into a middle-class, religious, conservative family. As a child, she showed great talent in both art and poetry. As a teen, contrary to the way she had been raised, Betsy started embracing some rather liberal and feminist views. After her graduation from Holland High in 1965, she wanted to become a physician and give something back to those less fortunate. That fall, Betsy attended Hope College. After 2 years, she transferred to the University of Michigan. It was there that she met David Wright. Wright was Betsy's first real boyfriend, and he had also planned on becoming a physician. Betsy graduated from the University of Michigan with honors in 1969 and planned on joining the Peace Corps to go to work in Africa. Although her relationship with Wright would set her plans on a different course. She could picture a future with him, but he wasn't seeing that same picture if she left for another country. Wright would be attending school in Hershey, Pennsylvania, so Betsy enrolled at Penn State to stay closer to him. She took school very seriously, but only 8 weeks in, she had already fallen behind on an English assignment. She spent the day before Thanksgiving and part of Thanksgiving Day with Wright, his roommates, and their girlfriends. They even discussed getting engaged around Christmas. That afternoon, on November 27th, Wright drove Betsy to the bus stop so that she could head back to school. She had a meeting scheduled with a professor to get advice on her research paper. At 4 p.m. on Friday, November 28th, Betsy met with university professor Nicholas Tchaikovsky. They spent a few minutes exchanging ideas, then she headed towards the campus library. She stopped and talked to friends that she passed along the way. By 4:30 p.m., Betsy was entering the dim-lit Pattee Library and walking towards level 2 to search for the books that she needed. While the library wasn't nearly as busy as usual, there was still plenty going on. An assistant supervisor walked by Betsy and a couple of young men 2 aisles over. Another man was using the photocopier and heard quiet conversations nearby. Around 4:50 p.m., the library was suddenly filled with the sound of crashing bookshelves. A young man came running from the direction of the noise, yelling that there was a girl that needed help. 2 students saw the man running and jumped into action. One of them went to find the girl in need, and the other followed the man running. That man went out the stairwell and continued running outside. He was too fast, and the student couldn't keep up with him. In the library, the other student got down by the girl on the ground. It appeared she had fainted or had a seizure. She was unresponsive and laying in a pool of urine. The student started administering mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Soon, other students had gathered to watch the efforts to revive the girl. At 5:01 p.m., a call was made to the campus hospital for help with a student that they believed had fainted. 2 student paramedics showed up and put the female on the gurney and into the ambulance. They continued to do CPR. She was wearing a white turtleneck under a red dress. The sweater was pretty thick, and no one had noticed a small spot of blood that was seeping through the red dress. It was a stab wound that wasn't noticed until she was being looked over by senior medical staff. They immediately observed a small spot of blood and ordered the CPR to stop. They cut her clothes off, and once the red dress was pulled back, they saw a blood-soaked sweater. Once her clothing was removed, the stab wound was revealed. At 5:19 p.m., Betsy was pronounced dead. An autopsy started at 11 p.m. and ended at 4 a.m. the next morning. Betsy had a single stab wound that had penetrated her breastbone and pierced her heart, severing the pulmonary artery. It was noted that she had died within 5 minutes from being stabbed. It also stated that there was extensive hemorrhaging in her chest cavity. She essentially drowned in her own blood. There were signs of bruising behind her ear and on her head, indicating that she fell pretty quick and hard. From the injury's location, it's believed that the assailant was right-handed and aimed for the heart. By the time they realized that Betsy had been killed and sent an investigator to the scene, it was hard to tell that anything had happened there. The janitors had already cleaned up the urine, pushed the bookshelves back up, and restacked the books. Any physical evidence that once existed had been destroyed or compromised. The investigators still taped off the area while searching for any clues. The two students that saw the man yelling and running away were interviewed. They reported that the man's right hand was concealed. He was wearing khakis, a sports coat, and had styled brown hair. He was around 6 feet tall and weighed about 185. Blood droplets were found that matched Betsy's in the staircase. Both of the students helped in a drawing of the man that could be released to the public, and the police released a bulletin asking for the man to come forward for an interview, but he never did. 35 investigators were assigned to look into the murder. Over the next few months, they interviewed hundreds of students. Any other Friday, about 400 students entered or exited the Pattee Library between 4:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. However, on that Friday, there were only about 90 students present, and none of those students that were questioned seemed like viable suspects. The entire campus was searched, but the weapon was never found. A $25,000 reward was offered for any assistance in the arrest. Theories started to circulate. It was determined that Betsy must have known the murderer. She was stabbed in the front, and the library aisles were very narrow, and when the person approached her, she didn't run or scream. Although any evidence of the actual crime was ruined, police did find other interesting things on that aisle. Over 24 pornographic magazines were found shoved in between the books. A light showed that semen was on the floor, walls, and shelves. They realized that the aisle had concealed illicit sexual encounters. Maybe a fellow student was there enjoying himself and Betsy surprised him, or a homosexual encounter taking place and they wanted to make sure that she didn't tell anyone what she had witnessed. There were fingerprints everywhere, but they were smudged or otherwise unusable. The police interviewed David Wright, her boyfriend, about his alibi, and it was confirmed. Even though they didn't have a real reason to assume Wright to have killed Betsy, they visited the campus so many times that they were eventually asked to stay off the property. There were a few other people that were considered suspects. William Spencer, a 40-year-old sculptor that had moved to Pennsylvania with his second wife. She had just started working on her PhD, and Spencer was teaching a sculpting class there. In 1969, at a Christmas party, he told someone that he had killed the girl in the library. When the police interviewed him, he admitted that he was indeed at the library on level 2, but that the only conversations he had with the slightly prudish Betsy were about her becoming a nude model for his class to make extra money. They also questioned a man named Larry Maurer, a fellow student. He admitted that he had coffee with Betsy and they were acquaintances, but that was as far as their relationship went. He did take a polygraph, but the results were never released. He did not match the physical description of the person that was running away and eventually cleared as a suspect. Then there was Richard Haefner, a 25-year-old geology student. He lived across the courtyard from Betsy. He told the police that they had started a pretty serious friendship the week before she died. She told him that they needed to quit talking because she wanted to be faithful to Wright. He did kind of match the sketch. He also often wore khakis and sports coats. Haefner was known for having erratic behavior and a bad temper. Betsy's roommate even told the police that she suspected him. He claimed that he was in a student building eating lunch at the time. He said that when he heard rumors that his former girlfriend was killed, he felt physically ill. But Betsy was never his girlfriend. So maybe his cheese had slid off his cracker, or he was trying to conceal his homosexual desires, a theory that seemed true in 1975 when two young boys around the age of 12 accused him of molesting them. One of those cases went to trial but ended up with a hung jury. Haefner sued everyone involved in the case. Investigative journalists and independent authors have delved into the possibilities. Although he was never formally accused of the crime involving Betsy, multiple people have claimed that he is the murderer. It was later reported that he told an acquaintance that Betsy had been killed far before the name or details had been released. His nephew even claimed he overheard a fight where the subject came up. 2 books have been published, one by Derek Sherwood and one by David DeCock, that both indicate Haefner was the assailant, even if all the evidence was circumstantial. Pennsylvania's most famous unsolved murder took place in a quiet library, but the cry for better security echoed across many college campuses in the nation. Prior to Betsy's murder, the Penn State campus had already seen an increase in violent crimes and sexual assaults. But the death of Betsy Aardsma was a major factor in the university forming a police force and increasing public safety. Many other universities and colleges followed in their footsteps. We may not know who stabbed Betsy between the stacks that day, but as we know with many unsolved murders, people will continue to search for answers. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you so much for listening. If you are a new listener to 10-Minute Murder, I'm glad you are here. Please settle in, listen to some of the back episodes, and that will be more easy to do if you subscribe to 10-Minute Murder. Also, connect with me on social media to see the pictures that we talk about here on the podcast. Never gross and graphic stuff, though. And it's hard to believe we are already this deep into October. It's crazy how fast it's flying by. It's almost over, and it feels like it just started. But you still have time to share the podcast because, reminder, if you share the podcast, take a snapshot of it, a screenshot of it, and send it to me. Let me know that you've shared the podcast on any place social media-wise. You're going to be entered into a random drawing to win a Target gift card. So you've still got some time left to do that. And by the way, if you like this episode, if you enjoy short stories about true crime, make sure you leave a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, Audible, any place that's possible. Your positive feedback helps this show grow. And that's going to do it. That is your episode for today. Thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.